Welcome to today's episode of the Adapted Ambitions podcast. I'm going to be speaking about what hedge funds, startups, and AI native companies are seeking right now. For context, for over 20 years, I've worked in recruitment within this space, both in the US and also the UK, and also covering APAC. And so I want to share some of this knowledge. I want to share an insider's perspective on what companies are currently looking for in the market. I also run my own search firm, Inference Search and Advisory Services, where I work with hedge funds, AI labs, and startups. So listen up if you want some insight into what these companies are looking for now. If you're looking for a move into a hedge fund, an AI lab, a deep tech startup, the first thing you need to know is that they don't necessarily hire in the same way that big tech companies do. They're not necessarily posting all of their jobs on LinkedIn or running 6, 7, 10 round interview processes. And they're definitely not necessarily looking to optimize for culture fit in the way that companies like Google or Meta do. Some companies do, but not all of them. So I want to pull back the curtain, because I think that if you're using the same playbook that got you your last job, then you might struggle in this day and age. I want to tell you what these firms are actually looking for, how they assess talent, and how to position yourself if you want in. I'm Ada Offonry, and you're listening to Adapted Ambitions. First of all, let's look at the hiring trend. So within hedge funds, if you're a senior quantitative researcher, for example, within a systematic fund, you should be definitely expecting offers in dollars in the 300K to 600K range. At the top end, if you're a senior quant researcher that has a direct link to revenue generation and is substantiated, you can expect that to be significantly more, going up to, $1 million or $2 million, depending on the firm and depending on your track record. A few years ago, that comp range of the 300 to 600K dollars would have probably been 250 to 450K. So the pay has definitely gone higher. And I think that the impact of the AI talent market salaries going through the roof has had a collective uplift on career paths that are either directly within the AI ML path, but also peripheral to that path as well. If we look at what's been happening with AI labs, OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, they're hiring fewer people, because they're still hiring huge numbers, but they're hiring relatively fewer people. But we're seeing that the offers they're making are 20 to 30% higher than, say, they would have made in 2023. For companies like Meta Superintelligence Labs, I mean, the offers are astronomical, right? We're hearing figures of people being offered billions over 3, 4, 5 years to be able to join them. For deep tech startups and AI first companies within, robotics, biotech, etc., these companies are offering equity packages that actually matter. So they're not offering the 0.01% equity package, but they're offering 0.5 to 2% for senior engineers. And so moving into these organizations, the risk is higher, but so is the potential upside. All of these worlds are hiring for depth, not necessarily breadth, and they'd rather have 3 exceptional people than have 20 mediocre people. So if you're interested in working in a systematic fund or a hedge fund, and I'm not talking about, discretionary macro funds, because that's a completely different world. I'm specifically talking about systematic trading and quant trading. Then let's look at a few things that they're looking for. In addition to technical depth, these companies are typically looking for intellectual honesty, being able to admit what you know and what you don't know, being able to admit when you're wrong. If you don't have an answer to something, be upfront about not having an answer to that thing. And if what you're doing is taking a stab at the answer, be upfront that that's what you're doing. For a lot of these companies, the stakes are really high. People want to work with team members that they trust. And so from the get-go, even if not stated explicitly, they're definitely implicitly assessing your intellectual honesty. The second thing I'd say is around clarity of thoughts. So oftentimes I'll speak to really, really smart people, but when they're trying to explain a complex concept to me, they basically go around in circles. And what you find is that the people who secure the best opportunities and are always securing offers are people who are able to explain really complex concepts in a very systematic and straightforward way. So can you explain a complex problem simply? Can you break down your reasoning rather than, just sort of talking in jargon? A lot of these companies are really impressed by very clear thinking. The third thing I'd say is a real obsession with your niche area. So, this is about people who will spend hours debugging code or refining a model or optimizing a specific system, not because they have to, but because they just can't stand it being messy and they care about the quality of their work and they have extremely high standards. And if you're somebody who has the mindset of, that's not my job or it's good enough or I can't be bothered to spend any more time on it, I would argue that you're probably not a good fit for these sort of environments. The fourth thing I'd say is that these companies typically love people with low ego. Now, I know everyone has some form of ego and it's difficult to have a company that's devoid of people with huge egos. It's just not possible. But I guess the key idea here is that you're not somebody who needs to take credit for every idea, and you're not somebody who struggles with feedback or thinks that you're smarter than everyone around you. If you're going to be working in a systematic fund, you're literally going to be surrounded by some of the smartest people you've ever been around. And these people have opinions and they can always think about 10 ways in which the thing that you did could have been done better. So it's about somebody who isn't necessarily attached to the how, but is committed to getting the best possible result, even if those ideas don't necessarily come from you. Now, do they care about your pedigree? Yes. Right? They care if you've gone to certain schools, studied certain subjects, gotten certain degrees, worked at certain companies. Of course, that matters, but that's not the be all and end all of it. I come across people who will say, I didn't go to Cambridge or Oxford or Stanford or MIT. Does that mean I can't work in one of these quant funds? That's not the case. You absolutely can. The key thing here is that you need to know your story inside out. You need to have real technical depth in your area of expertise. You need to have the attributes that I talked about earlier, but you have to be able to sell yourself at interviews. You have to be able to own your story and tell your story at interview, and practice before you go in. And then you've also got to know how to position yourself, right? And this is not just about telling a prospective employer that, you know how to do X or Y, but have demonstrable evidence. So if you're somebody who, is able to code, have GitHub repos. If you're a researcher in a particular domain, have research papers, publish research papers that demonstrate your thinking, have projects that demonstrate your depth. And so when you're in interviews, you're able to pull upon some of these things, and they form the basis of conversations. And wouldn't you rather your interviews are based around things that you've excelled at rather than interviews being around, some sort of random subjects that you're struggling to sort of piece your mind around. So those are definitely things that you need to be aware of if you're looking to move into a systematic fund. If you're looking to move into an AI lab like the Anthropics and DeepMinds of the world, AI labs are different from hedge funds because a lot of them in this day and age tend to be mission driven, research heavy, and they care deeply about taste. So what they'll be assessing is, one, your research rigor. So do you have publications? Do you have open source contributions? Do you have GitHub repos? Can you point to work that you've done that pushed the field forward, even incrementally? I talked about taste earlier. Can you tell the difference between what is a real concrete solution versus what is a clever hack? Do you have intuition about what matters, about what's important to sort of research further, or when you should come to an end of chasing a particular research track? It's hard to define taste, but I think in these environments, they know it when they see it. The third thing they'll look at is collaboration. The reality is that AI research is collaborative. These companies want people that they can work well with across multiple teams, and they can share knowledge, and they can collectively lift the team that you're part of as a whole and make the research better. The fourth thing they'll look for is alignment with their mission. They care deeply about the research that they're doing and the way that they're going to be impacting the world. And so do you care about AI safety? Do you care about building AI responsibly? If you're just kind of there to ride the crest of the wave and secure a high paycheck, they can usually tell. We're getting a lot of reports about people at the start of their careers within not getting as many opportunities within AI labs or within AI machine learning. I think that the opportunities are there. You just have to be broader, and you just have to be intentional about how you're navigating that segment of the job market. But also in your own time, make sure that you're doing your research, make sure that you're demonstrating your thinking, make sure that you're showing evidence of your contribution to the field. And when you're in interviews, make sure that you're talking about the problems that you're excited to solve, and not necessarily the job you want to land or the prestige behind it. But I know that that sounds obvious for a lot of people. Let's talk now about what deep tech startups want. So startups are different because, they're scrappy, they're fast moving, they need people who can do more than one thing. What they don't want is someone who says, that's not my job. That's not going to work within a startup. So they need people with builder mentality. So for example, can you ship? Can you go from an idea to a working prototype quickly? They don't want perfectionists, people who will tinker around with the same idea for ages until they get it perfect. They want people who can move, people who can iterate, people who are comfortable moving forward with the minimum viable product. The other thing I'd say that deep tech startups are looking for are people who are comfortable with ambiguity. So you don't necessarily need to have the complete set of information to move things forward. And so it's people who have the right kind of judgment to be able to figure out just how much information is needed, where to get that information from, and how to move the process forward, even though the information that you have is incomplete. Deep tech startups also like people who take ownership, right? So they want people who can treat the company as if it were theirs, not necessarily people who are waiting to be directed. And so, people who will do whatever it takes to ship a product out of the door. Deep tech startups work really well for people who are also very scrappy, so you might have limited resources. You might not have the same resources as your competitor down the road, but can you make do with what you have? Can you operate in an environment where you don't necessarily have an unlimited budget? And, I would say that with these companies, they don't necessarily care about, your job titles and working at this top tier company. What they care about is about what you've built. So, what side projects have you worked on? What open source projects have you worked on? What have you actually shipped on your own? And so in many of the interviews, you want to be asking about the problems they're looking to solve, not necessarily the perks or the comp. And you want to be able to position yourself, if you have, as somebody who has solved some of these problems beforehand. So I want to put all of this together and talk about a few principles that will help you if you're interviewing for any of these types of companies. So the first is you want to show, not necessarily tell. So it's not sufficient to say, oh, I'm a great problem solver, but it's far more effective to show a problem that you've actually solved, to show your GitHub, to show the projects that you've worked on. The proof here matters significantly rather than your words. The second thing is you need to be as specific specific as possible when talking about your experience or when talking about what your needs and desires are. So it's not sufficient to go into one of these interviews and say, hey, I'm interested in AI. You want to say, listen, I want to work on reinforcement learning for robotics specifically. And that specificity shows you know what you're talking about, but it also signals how serious you are about what it is you're doing. And then the last thing I'd say is you definitely need to network, but as an insider, not as an outsider. So, go to the conferences. We have NeurIPS happening right now, ICML, ICLR, NVIDIA GTC. There are a plethora of these conferences that are happening. Engage with people on Twitter. Twitter is a fantastic hub for people in AI startups and also the large AI labs. Network with people on GitHub, show up in the world, right, before you need to look for a job, and just be aware of what people are talking about, because that also helps with your positioning as well. So some of the things that people do that messes up their chances with these companies is, one, applying through a website. If you're applying to OpenAI in today's world, think about it. They have thousands and thousands of applications from across the globe from some of the best minds in the world. It's tough. It'll be tough to get a job through that. Or having a generic cover letter or a generic resume or CV, that also doesn't work. You need to be as specific as possible. And sometimes that might mean taking the time to tailor your resume for a specific type of opportunity. The third thing I'd say is don't oversell yourself. Don't say you can do something that you can't, because that will come out, right? And it might be that, you were actually making a good impression on the people you're speaking to, the people you're interviewing with, but then they sniff out that you're BSing a little bit. And so that begins to sow seeds of doubt in their mind. So just, sell yourself, absolutely. Be confident, absolutely. But just be clear about where your capabilities lie and where they don't lie. A mistake I see people making all the time when it comes to job search processes with this industries is talking about comp really early. Granted, you might want to set the benchmarks, especially, for example, if you're working with a recruiter, you might want to set the benchmarks early. But you definitely don't want to be talking about comp with these companies really early on, because it does signal that you're just there for the money and not the work. And the reality is that most people are there for both, right? For both the money and the work. If you're interviewing at a hedge fund or an AI lab or a startup, you definitely want to invest time and to do your homework. You want to understand what the industry is about. You want to be clear on what the news is regarding the industry at that specific point in time. So really, really important to do your homework. Don't just kind of go in there and say, well, tell me about yourself. I see some people doing that sometimes and it always shocks me. So if you're somebody that is thinking to yourself, listen, I'm in technology, I want to move into a startup, or I want to move into a systematic fund, or I want to move into an AI lab, I'd say pick one area that you're interested in, pick a specific firm that you're interested in and spend time researching them. Look at their blog, look at their research papers, look at their GitHub, really understand what they care about. And then if you can identify someone in that company to connect with, then great, right? Because it optimizes your chances of being referred, which I'm an advocate for referrals and recruiters as a way to get into companies rather than applying online. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying it's inefficient. And then you want to audit your online presence and be sure that you're showcasing your work where it makes sense to, and that your LinkedIn, your GitHub, your website, all of that shows the depth of your technical knowledge and it's not just kind of generic. So if you're planning to move into any of these worlds and you want help with positioning yourself, preparing for interviews or evaluating offers, I actually offer a one-to-one service with technical professionals navigating exactly this. So you can learn more at adaoffonry.com/advisory. You could also join my newsletter at adaoffonry.com, where I'll be talking about weekly insights on technical careers, market intelligence, and what's actually working working right now. So that's it for today's episode. Next time, we're going to be talking about reinvention inside your current job, and also how to upgrade your role, your scope, and your comp without necessarily starting over. So you don't want to miss it. I'm Offonry. This is Adapted Ambition. See you next time.